Hello again. This is Mark Ias. I'm an elder in the Boston Church of Christ, and this sixth pandemic lockdown video installment is called Zoom Smoothies and Ethics. And let's start with a scripture. We'll refer back to this scripture a few times during the video. This is John 13:34 and 35, and it says this: I give you a new command. Love one another. Just as I have loved you, you must also love one another. By this all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. And why use the term Zoom Smoothies in the title? Well, that little turn of phrase comes from a Zoom call that we had with a couple that is dear to us, and we were noting the fact that all of our relationships have been poured into the same online blender, bzzz, and then poured out in one smooth stream of video calls. It used to be that for me, a video call distinguished my work relationships from my real relationships. Everything at work was on video. But now, that's not the case. It's all munged together. So how do we overcome this Zoom smoothie feeling of sameness that you might get? Well, one way to do it is love one another. Now, I know that's not specific, so we'll try to put a little bit of color on that. In Genesis 1, there is a beautiful poetic description of the creation where God starts from chaos and zooms in and focuses on that point in creation where he creates us, making it very personal. And we have that one comment that keeps adults and children talking and thinking. And in Genesis 1, verse 26, it says, Then God said, Let us make man in our image. So, as a child, of course, I wondered if God looked like me. Did he have dark curly hair and blue eyes and light skin? Well, I'm sure there was some other kid with dark skin and dark eyes and maybe long, straight, platinum blonde hair that thought the same thing. And if we can find that person, I'd like to meet her. But God was in the middle of this incredible creation, and at the end of it created the people that he loves. I think the primary thing that he wanted to pass on was that creativity, that inventiveness, that imagination. It is unfortunate that, like any great strength, it can go one way or the other. It can be twisted for evil. Note this comment from Paul in the letter to the Romans, chapter 1, and this is in verse 30. And Paul's in the middle of describing the bad places that people can go. And in verse 30, the list continues: slanderers, God-haters, arrogant, proud, boastful, inventors of evil, etc. Yeah, all that creativity can go bad, but it can go good too. There's an often quoted parable called the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10, and we see this exchange at the end where Jesus has been telling the parable to someone, and he asks which of the people in the story, the parable, was a neighbor to the guy who had been robbed. And in Luke 10, verse 37, the person answers, the one who showed mercy to him, he said. And then Jesus replied. Then Jesus told him, go and do the same. Now, we know that Jesus did not mean for us to fly to the land of Israel, wait along some road that goes between Jericho and Jerusalem, hoping that someone will get beat up so we can save them. And I'm not sure the EMTs would be okay if we poured olive oil and wine on this person's wounds before they got there. But what is the real message? Make it up. Use your creativity. Invent a way to do something good. And I think this creativity, we can use our imaginations to avoid this Zoom smoothie blandness and really resurrect hope. But the title is Zoom Smoothies and Ethics. And ethics sounds like such an intellectual topic and something that maybe a true Christian shouldn't have to worry about because, well, you have the Bible and it makes everything clear, doesn't it? Well, what is ethics? Well, here's a definition from a website, and it says this. It says, at its simplest, ethics is a system of moral principles. They affect how people make decisions and lead their lives. In my own words, it means this. What do you do when it's not written down? Or what do you do when it is written down and you still have to make a decision? Now that's where ethics could really come in. And you could see how our creativity would come into play right here. And here's the simplest example I can think of from the Old Testament. Here are two proverbs. They're written one right after each other in the same chapter, Proverbs 26, and they seem to contradict. And this is Proverbs 26, verse 4 and 5. It says this, "Don't answer a fool according to his foolishness, or you'll be like him yourself." Verse 5, "Answer a fool according to his foolishness, or he'll become wise in his own eyes." So which is it? Do I answer the guy or not? Is there something wrong with the translation maybe? Does the Bible contradict itself? Well, have you ever tried to work with a fool? I think these two proverbs are quite accurate. You have to make a decision. Quite obviously, there are times when you need to make it up and make a decision. And you need to use your inventiveness, your creativity to make that decision, and it won't be easy. Following good ethics is a challenge. It's a challenge for anyone. We will have loads of decisions to make about how to go and do the same, about how to just do good. And there is an example of this that has come about due to our pandemic lockdown that I wanted to talk about. There are some who say we should open everything up immediately because the lockdown is destroying our economy and by extension our lives. And it is true. It is damaging our economy, and we may not yet know to what extent. And there's even a scripture that could be used. In Hebrews 10, it says in verse 25, "Not staying away from our worship meetings, as some habitually do, but encouraging each other, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." The idea from that scripture being that if we have faith and obey the scripture, it'll go better for us. And that's also true. It is true that we should have faith, and it is true that we do a lot better spiritually when we meet with one another. And there are others, on the other hand, that say out of compassion for our fellow man, we should remain locked down to save lives and to not overload our medical professionals. And it is true, lockdown does slow the spread of anything, really, and make the stream of people going to the hospital less. At least the statistics from the rest of the world would indicate that. And some scriptures that you might use and bring to bear for this would be 1 Peter 3, verse 8 says, "Now, finally, all of you should be like-minded and sympathetic, should love believers, and be compassionate and humble." And then that famous parable again in Matthew 25 of the sheep and the goats, and at the end of the first half of the parable it says, "And the king will answer them." They were asking the question, "When did you ever see us do anything good?" And he says, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me." Our lockdown condition reminds me a little bit of the times when I was cooped up in the back seat of the car on a family trip, and I'd be there for hours. And of course, we would break out into squabbles and arguments, and every time one of my parents would turn around from the front seat and they'd say something like, "Why can't you just get along?" Undoubtedly, some of you listening will pick one or the other of the arguments I just laid out about the lockdown, and you'll say, "Yeah, that's right." Well, whatever your opinion is, whatever you think, do your actions and words make these words from Peter clear? Peter says in 1 Peter 4 and verse 8, "Above all, maintain an intense love for each other, since love covers a multitude of sins. You can do it! You can turn what were Zoom smoothies into these fantastic feasts. And you can discern and make decisions about these questions of ethics, all the while claiming that promise that we read at the beginning of this video in John 13, verse 35. It says this, "By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Use your imagination. Be creative. Make something up.